Bob Cousy is a basketball legend. There, that's my video. There's not really a lot more to add. Half of this video is going to be me ranting. Video from Cousy's era is rare. Stats are incomplete. This is what Cousy's game stats look like. See all the blank spots in the rebounds and assists categories? Every player's stats from this era look like this. And if you add up the stats on this page, you get a different number than Cousy's season totals and season averages. I contacted Sports Reference about this, and they told me that the season totals come from a different source than the individual game totals come from, so there could be inaccurate numbers here. Just keep that in mind for the entire video, and really anytime you hear about the stats of players before the mid-1960s. But I think I can show with the evidence we have that Bob Cousy was one of the greatest players of all time and deserves more respect from all of us who never got to see him play. By the end of the video, you will also believe that Bob Cousy is a basketball legend. Alright, let's get this clip out of the way, since it came up every time I searched for anything related to Cousy. I need to talk about it before I get to the actual arguments.
Wins a championship, he's in the conversation for the greatest point guard ever. I'm not saying he's the
no, he's not. Greatest point guard. He's not Bob Cousy. He's not Bob Cousy.
Bob Cousy couldn't dribble with his left hand.
Bob Cousy changed the game. Chris Paul didn't change the game.
Bob Cousy won championships when there were 8 teams in the NBA and you had to win 2 playoff series.
Guys, hold on.
Let's celebrate Bob Cousy in his era, but you can't compare pre-1980 with
yes, you can.
With the modern
yes,
NBA. No, you cannot. No, you
Cousy,
cannot.
well, how about West and Oscar? Can you compare Cousy with West and Oscar?
The great players could play in any era. There's no doubt about that.
Cousy was first team All-NBA when West and Oscar were playing. And he was first team All-NBA. That's against West and Oscar.
Well,
first team All-NBA.
You know,
has Paul ever been first team All-NBA?
Did Bob Cousy ever shoot over 40% from the field in his
we
career?
Understand that.
Did he overshoot? Did he ever shoot over 40%?
Probably 39, 40%. Different kind of game.
Not once.
It's
Not
fair.
once.
That's fair. He also had 29 assists in an NBA game.
Oh, well, you know, he was being guarded by plumbers and firemen.
This take is trash, but also kind of true. And I realize the point of shows like First Take are to get the presenters to be obnoxious loudmouths. They're aiming for entertainment more than information, and I promise you viewers I will use them as little as possible in my videos. But so few people actually talk about Cousy that I have to use what I've got. And that's kind of the problem I have and why I made this video. Chris and JJ are just using Cousy as a prop to talk about Chris Paul. There's no real discussion about Cousy's place in history. It's either Cousy changed the game and Chris Paul didn't, or it's Cousy played in a different era and can't be compared to today's players. I think both of those are interesting discussions we could have, but we didn't have those discussions. We didn't talk about Cousy's place in history because it wasn't about him. They could have used Magic Johnson or Oscar Robertson as a prop and the segment would have been the same, and that's why I hate it. There is so little Bob Cousy content out there. You probably know that. You probably found this video because you were searching YouTube for anything about Cousy and this was all you could find. I want to start a Cousy content revolution while he's still alive. He's 93 years old as I record this. We might not have much time, so I want everyone watching to go talk to someone you know about Bob Cousy today. Okay, so back to JJ and Chris's comments. First of all, Cousy could dribble with his left hand. He could also pass with his left hand and shoot with his left hand. He broke his right hand as a teenager and had to learn how to play with his left. It's one of the formative events that made Cousy a great basketball player. And I disagree that you can't compare players across eras. That's kind of my channel's whole deal. If you can't compare players across eras, then you can't even compare LeBron James to Michael Jordan. That's at least 60% of all NBA debates. Other than that though, everything they said was pretty much true. Cousy might have played against actual plumbers and firemen. Cousy himself was a driving instructor. He started a driving school before he ever played in the NBA. Basketball player wasn't considered a career in the 1950s. It was something you did for a few years if you were good enough before moving on to your real career. Just a few examples of guards during the 50s. Bob Davies, who invented the behind-the-back dribble, and Slater Martin, known as one of the best defensive guards of the era, both served in the Navy before joining the NBA. Andy Phillip, Richie Guerin, and Bobby Wanzer served in the Marines. You know what, actually none of them were plumbers because they were all busy fighting against Japan in World War II. These were the guys J.J. Redick was disrespecting, by the way. But the point is, players didn't dedicate their lives to playing basketball, and Cousy didn't either. They were still the best players in the world. The NBA was racially integrated before Cousy joined the league, and no other professional leagues at the time were nearly as prominent as the NBA. The players he was competing against had been All-Americans in the NCAA at a time when college basketball was more popular than professional basketball. Many of them were also All-Americans in other sports. Some even played baseball in the major leagues. These were the best basketball players and some of the best athletes in the world, whether or not basketball player was their true career. If you dropped any player from today's NBA in that era, he'd probably be a Hall of Famer as soon as he adjusted to the rules. That's just how anything competitive works. The players in each generation are better than the ones that came before them because they've learned all the best moves, practice techniques, preparedness techniques, and so on from the past generations. That doesn't mean you can't compare players from different generations. You just have to think more about it and not just look at stats. And it definitely doesn't mean you can disrespect past generations for not having the advantages the current one does. Everyone in the 1950s were on an even playing field with each other, and if one player clearly stood out from everyone else, he deserves recognition. That's exactly what Cousy did. These are the only highlights we have of Andy Phillip, the assists champ before Cousy. Just compare these to the clips I have in this video of Cousy. Cousy was 15 to 20 years ahead of his time with his moves, and looked nothing like the other guards at the time. And here is a comparison of the career stats of every guard who made an All-NBA team in the 1950s. Cousy averaged the most points, by far the most assists, and made by far the most All-NBA teams, 10 of which were first team. He gets some criticism for his low shooting percentages, but compared to the very best guards of his era, he was pretty much average as a shooter. In his peak seasons, he was actually an above-average shooter, even when compared to forwards and centers. Cousy had 10 years in a row averaging at least 18 points per game, and 10 years in a row averaging at least 7 assists per game. 9 in a row of those seasons overlapped, where he averaged both 18 points and 7 assists. In the 1950s, he averaged 18 points per game 8 times, and 7 assists per game 7 times. All other guards in the 1940s and 50s averaged 18 points per game 11 times total. All other 1950s guards averaged 7 assists 5 times total. Cousy wasn't just the best guard of the era, he was lapping the competition. Bigs dominated scoring in the early years of basketball, but 6'1" Cousy was able to finish in the top 4 in scoring 4 times. 3 of those years he also led in assists. The 4th he finished second in assists. Cousy averaged 20 points per game 4 times and was the only point guard to ever do it before Oscar Robertson joined the league in 1960. Cousy and Oscar are connected in another way. Cousy won the MVP in 1957, and Oscar won the MVP in 1964. In the first 25 years the award existed, they were the only players who weren't centers or power forwards to win. In the first 31 years of the award, they were the only guards to win. In that same period, the ABA handed out 11 MVP awards, none of them to guards. Cousy was not only far and away the best guard of his era, he was one of only 2 guards considered the best player in the league at any point in the first few decades of the NBA. Cousy dominated not with size, but with skill and technique. Some observers even said he saved basketball from becoming dominated by unstoppable tall men and players with one shooting gimmick. Which brings me to my next point, that the NBA might not exist today if not for Bob Cousy. Between the founding of the first professional league in 1898 and the 1946 founding of the league, which became the NBA, there were at least 26 professional basketball leagues that were founded in the United States and quickly folded. The league only existed 4 years before Cousy was drafted, and in that time it expanded twice and contracted twice. In fact, the reason Cousy ended up on the Celtics was because the team he was on, the Chicago Stags, folded before he ever played a game. There was no good reason to assume the NBA would last for decades like it has. College basketball was more popular than professional, and the Harlem Globetrotters drew larger crowds than the NBA did when Cousy entered the league. But the league contracted for the final time the year before Cousy won his MVP award and has done nothing but add new teams since. We'll never know what would have happened to the NBA without Cousy. A lot of all-time great players entered the league in the late 50s and early 60s, so it might be exactly where it is today without him. But you can't deny that he combined fan-friendly showmanship and flair with immense talent in a way no one had before Cousy, but continues to be combined by star players to this day. So yes, Cousy is a basketball legend. He is one of the greatest to ever play the game and not just a product of his era. He dominated his era like no one has dominated any other NBA era, and is one of the most important innovators in the sport's history. And if you don't believe that, you are underrating Bob Cousy. Thanks for checking out my video. If you enjoyed it, leave a like and subscribe to see more. The more subscriptions I get, the faster new videos will come out. I think the next thing I release will be in a different series, but I will make more underrated videos in the future. If you have any ideas for someone in the present or past who you think is underrated and want to see me cover, leave your suggestions in the comments. I hope to see you again soon.